Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. The verity has officially been revealed, and in this script the disclosure that Dylan is actually Luna becomes not simply a shocking plot twist but a broad redefinition of identity, memory, love, and consequence within the heightened emotional macrocosm of the young and the restless. Because the moment RJ uncovers that Dylan is in fact Luna who has experienced plastic surgery isn't treated as a gimmick but as the capstone of times of cerebral fracture, narrative misdirection, and buried trauma that has been still shaping every commerce, every taradiddle, and every moment of craving that Dylan/Luna has endured, and the script leans completely into the melodramatic weight of that verity by framing the reveal as both an external unmasking and an internal collapse, where the followership is forced to recontextualize everything they allowed they knew about Dylan's provocations and Luna's exposure, as RJ's discovery functions like a key that unlocks a maze of suppressed recollections, guilt, and tone preservation instincts that have driven Luna to abolish herself and rebuild as Dylan, not out of vanity or malignancy but out of despair and survival in a world that constantly penalized her vulnerability. Because Luna's choice to suffer plastic surgery is depicted not as a shallow act of reinvention but as a final, irrevocable ramifying from a once identity that had come synonymous with pain, treason, and loss, and through RJ's perspective the followership is allowed to witness the slow-forming horror of consummation as small inconsistencies, gestures, turns of expression, emotional responses that no way relatively betrothed Dylan's supposed backstory, suddenly snap into focus, forming a devastatingly clear picture that Dylan's entire actuality has been an elaborate performance erected on fear, craving, and the belief that Luna could only be safe if she no longer was, which makes RJ's part especially pivotal because he's not simply the operative figure uncovering the verity but an emotional glass reflecting what Luna has been running from, as his battle is written with a careful balance of shock, compassion, wrathfulness, and unbelief, allowing the scene to breathe and giving weight to the idea that verity in this macrocosm isn't liberating by dereliction but deeply destabilizing. And when RJ eventually articulates the insolvable judgment, Dylan is Luna, it lands like a seismic event that ripples backward through the narrative and forward into its consequences, because this disclosure forces every relationship to be reconsidered under a harsher, more woeful light, including the connections Dylan formed under false pretenses, the adversaries he provoked, and the abettors he manipulated without their concurrence, and yet the script is careful not to reduce Luna to a villain, rather situating her as a profoundly shattered promoter whose choices were shaped by systemic neglect, particular treason, and the implacable pressure to be someone she could no longer survive as, making the plastic surgery itself a symbol of both agency and erasure, a fleshly incarnation of the theme that identity in YNR is both fluid and fragile, able of being rewritten but no way completely escaped, because no matter how convincingly Luna came Dylan, the emotional verity of who she was continued to blunder through in moments of tender-heartedness, rage, and sweat that RJ, in retrospection, recognizes as distinctly Luna-like, and this recognition becomes a source of anguish for him because it implicates him in her suffering, forcing him to defy the possibility that he failed Luna formerly ahead and is now on the verge of failing her again by exposing her. And the script heightens this pressure by lacing RJ's moral obligation to verity with his emotional desire to cover her, creating a conflict that embodies the show's long-standing seductiveness with secrets and their sharp power, as the disclosure doesn't offer catharsis but rather opens a crack that refuses to close, especially when Luna, possessed by RJ's knowledge, is eventually forced to drop the Dylan persona and speak as herself, a moment that's written with ruinous restraint as the script allows silence, fractured rulings, and raw emotion to do the work rather than psychodrama, emphasizing that Luna's return isn't triumphant but intimidating, because she must now face a world that believes she failed, betrayed them, or fated by choice, and worse, she must face herself, the person she believed she had to destroy in order to live, and through this lens the twist becomes a contemplation on tone denial and the cerebral cost of long-term deception, as Luna's internal harangue, whether spoken or inferred, reveals the prostration of maintaining Dylan's identity, the constant alert needed to ensure that no bones saw past the mask, and the profound loneliness of being known only as someone you're not, which makes the reveal lower about shock value and further about emotional ineluctability, because the followership is led to understand that this outgrowth was always coming, that the cracks in Dylan's facade were widening with every occasion, every close call, every moment of vulnerability that hovered to expose Luna's verity. And RJ's discovery is simply the catalyst that brings times of internal conflict into the open, forcing the narrative into a new phase where the consequences of identity theft, both non-fictional and emotional, must be brazened, and this battle extends beyond Luna herself to the broader social and moral geography of YNR, as other characters will inescapably grapple with passions of treason, sympathy, wrathfulness, and confusion, questioning whether they ever truly knew Dylan and whether they can now accept Luna, and the script dashingly leaves these responses undetermined in the immediate fate, allowing the reveal to serve as a narrative reset rather than a conclusion, signaling that the real story begins after the verity is known, not ahead, because the act of disclosure doesn't restore order but destabilizes it, challenging the characters and the followership to review their hypotheticals about identity, responsibility, and redemption, especially as Luna's conduct enthrall an innocently Argentine space where her reasons are accessible indeed if her styles were dangerous, and this nebulosity is where the script finds its topmost strength, refusing to offer easy answers or clear villains, rather embracing the messiness that has long defined the cleaner piece's kidney at its stylish, and by tying the twist so privately to themes of identity and survival, the script elevates what could have been a sensational plot device into a character-driven disquisition of what it means to be seen, to be believed, and to be allowed to live as your true tone, indeed when that tone has caused detriment or made insupportable choices, and RJ's part as the deliverer of verity eventually positions him not as a rescuer or destroyer but as a substantiation, someone who now carries the burden of knowing and must decide how to act in a world where the line between right and wrong has been blurred by love, fear, and history, and as the occasion closes on the image of Luna standing exposed, no longer Dylan yet not completely reclaimed as Luna, the script leaves the followership with a moping sense of apprehension and expectation, understanding that while the verity has officially been revealed, its ramifications are only just beginning to unfold, promising unborn stories rich with emotional fallout, ethical dilemmas, and the possibility, still fragile, of redemption, making this twist not just a caption-grabbing reveal but a foundational shift in the narrative armature of The Young and the Restless, one that reaffirms the show's continuing commitment to exploring the complications of mortal identity through heightened drama and deeply particular stakes. In the fate of RJ's discovery, the narrative instigation of the script deepens rather than resolves, because the exposure of Luna beneath Dylan's precisely constructed surface doesn't restore clarity but rather fractures the emotional geography into contending trueness, each demanding to be conceded. And the durability of the story leans into this fragmentation by exploring how disclosure alters not only how characters see Luna but how Luna sees herself, as the formerly impenetrable cerebral armor she erected as Dylan begins to disintegrate, leaving her vulnerable to recollections she had surgically and emotionally buried, and the script wisely avoids rushing this process, rather allowing Luna's unraveling to do in uneven swells, moments of icy detachment followed by willful emotion, illustrating how deeply Dylan had come a survival medium rather than a simple disguise. Because Luna didn't simply pretend to be someone differently, she trained herself to suppose, reply, and feel as Dylan would, and now that the verity is out, she's brazened with the intimidating question of whether Luna still exists as a coherent tone or whether she has been irreversibly altered by the time spent living a taradiddle, and this internal conflict becomes the emotional machine of the durability, especially as RJ struggles with his own part in the unfolding chaos, caught between empathy for Luna's suffering and fury at the manipulation that compromised his trust and risked others, a duality that the script uses to explore the moral cost of secretiveness, since RJ's wrathfulness is no way allowed to outdo his compassion, nor is his compassion permitted to reason Luna's conduct outright, creating a pressure that glasses the followership's own equivocal response. And as the verity begins to spread, first by whispers, also in competitions, the durability underscores how secrets in the YNR macrocosm function like contagions, infecting connections that formerly sounded stable, because characters who believed they knew Dylan must now attune the kindnesses and brutality they endured with the knowledge that those moments were shaped by someone additional's pain and fear, and this reevaluation becomes particularly painful for those who commended in Dylan, loved him, or trusted him with information that Luna no way should have had access to, forcing the script to interrogate whether emotional authenticity can live within deception, and if so, whether that authenticity retains value once the taradiddle is exposed, a question that plays out most poignantly in scenes where characters defy Luna not with allegations but with grief, mourning the Dylan they allowed they knew while contemporaneously scuffling with the return of Luna, a woman they may not fate presently, and this sense of loss is compounded by the fact that Dylan was, in numerous ways, the strongest interpretation of Luna, further assertive, more defended, less fluently hurt, which leads to a haunting subtext throughout the durability that Dylan may have been who Luna demanded to come in order to survive, indeed if getting him eventually destroyed her capability to live actually, and the script deepens this tragedy by revealing flashbacks or admissions that illuminate just how purposeful Luna's erasure of herself was. How the decision to suffer plastic surgery followed not a single traumatic event but an accumulation of backstabbings and discharges that induced her that Luna would no way be safe, no way be believed, and no way be allowed to win, and these exposures complicate the followership's judgment because they frame Luna's conduct as the logical endpoint of a system that constantly failed her, indeed as they do vindicate her of responsibility for the detriment caused by assuming Dylan's identity, and this moral complexity is imaged in the way the durability handles responsibility, as R.J. and others grapple with what justice should look like in a situation where the perpetrator and the victim are the same person, because Luna is both the mastermind of the deception and its topmost casualty, having offered her body, her name, and her history in exchange for a fragile sense of control, and the script resists the temptation to offer immediate redemption or discipline, rather sticking Luna in a liminal space where she must defy the consequences of her choices without yet knowing whether remission or exile awaits her. And this query energizes some of the most emotionally charged moments of the durability, particularly when Luna attempts to articulate why she couldn't simply return as herself, why concession felt insolvable, and why being Dylan, despite the constant fear of exposure, felt safer than being seen as Luna ever did, and these harangues are written with a rawness that strips away any remaining artifice, revealing a woman who internalized the belief that her true tone was disposable, and as this belief comes into focus, the durability expands its thematic compass to address the broader idea of reinvention within YNR, a show long defined by characters who resuscitate themselves through name changes, affairs, power plays, and non-fictional rejuvenescences. But then the act of reinvention is presented not as glamorous or empowering but as psychologically ruinous, a memorial that while identity can be reshaped, it cannot be discarded without consequence, and this is where the durability finds its emotional resonance, by showing that the price of getting Dylan wasn't just the threat of being discovered but the slow corrosion of Luna's capacity for closeness, because maintaining the taradiddle needed constant emotional distance, a turndown to completely attach, and an instinct to run at the first sign of vulnerability, patterns that persist indeed after the verity is known, leaving Luna insulated at the very moment she's most exposed, and RJ's attempts to bridge this distance are fraught with mistakes, as he alternates between protection and interrogator, occasionally speaking to Luna as if she's still Dylan, other times projecting his recollections of the old Luna onto a woman who no longer fits neatly into either order, and this confusion becomes representational of the durability's central pressure, the impossibility of returning to what was, indeed after the verity is revealed. Because exposure doesn't rewind time or undo metamorphosis, and the durability underscores this by allowing Luna moments where she artificially responds as Dylan would, using his meter, his posture, his emotional restraint, a head catching herself, illustrating how deeply the persona has been ingrained, and these moments are still ruinous, because they suggest that Dylan will no way completely vanish, that he'll remain a cerebral echo within Luna, a memorial of both her adaptability and her tone loathing. And as other characters begin to demand answers, justifications, or retaliation, the durability becomes decreasingly concentrated on choice, particularly the choices Luna must now make in a world where caching is no longer an option. And this leads to a critical turning point where Luna is forced to decide whether to continue running, maybe by leaving Genoa City entirely, or to stay and face the consequences of her conduct, a decision that the script frames not as a question of courage but of tone worth, because staying would mean believing that Luna deserves to live openly, indeed if that actuality is messy, painful, and fraught with judgment, and this internal struggle is imaged by RJ's own reckoning, as he confronts the consummation that uncovering the verity doesn't grant him moral superiority but rather implicates him in the coming phase of Luna's life, because now that he knows, his choices carry weight, and the durability explores whether verity telling is enough, or whether responsibility also requires compassion, discretion, and a amenability to accept amiss issues, and this philosophical turnabout elevates the durability beyond plot mechanics, transubstantiating it into a contemplation on what it means to truly see another person, not as who you want them to be or who they pretend to be, but as who they are, contradictions and all. And as the story builds toward its coming bow, the durability leaves the followership with a sense of uneasy expectation, because while the secret is out, the emotional fallout is only beginning, connections remain shattered, trust is conditional at best, and Luna stands at the center of the storm, no longer shielded by Dylan's identity yet not completely reclaimed as herself, embodying the uncomfortable verity that disclosure isn't an ending but a mourning, and that occasionally the most delicate part of a secret isn't keeping it, but living after it has been told, making this durability an important extension of the original twist, one that deepens the cerebral stakes and reinforces the young and the restless continuing commitment to exploring the fragile, painful, and endlessly compelling complications of identity, verity, and survival. As the fallout continues to ripple outward, the script's durability moves into an indeed more introspective and innocently charged phase, one that interrogates not only Luna's metamorphosis into Dylan but the broader emotional ecosystem that allowed such an extreme erasure of tone to go unnoticed for so long, because the longer the verity exists in the open, the more it becomes clear that this disclosure isn't an insulated rupture but a reckoning that exposes the fault lines beneath. Nearly every relationship in Genoa City, and Luna, stripped of the defensive certainty that Dylan formerly handed, now exists in a constant state of cerebral whiplash, oscillating between a fierce instinct to defend her choices and an inviting shame that threatens to collapse her entirely, and the script captures this insecurity by placing her in situations where she must answer questions she no way allowed herself to ask while caching, questions about desire, responsibility, and whether the interpretation of herself that survived as Dylan deserves the same compassion as the interpretation that was broken as Luna. And this pressure is heightened by the responses of those around her, because while some characters respond with wrathfulness and demand consequences, others are disarmed by the depth of her pain, doubtful whether to treat her as a felonious architect or a trauma survivor. And this lack of agreement becomes a narrative machine in itself, creating alliances and fractures that feel organic rather than manufactured, as the durability resists simplifying the moral geography into icons and villains, rather allowing every character's response to be shaped by their own history with loss, treason, and reinvention, and R.J., now forcefully deposited as the emotional axis of the story, finds himself scuffling with the unintended consequences of being the bone who uncovered the verity, because knowledge has converted him into a reticent doorkeeper, someone whose words and silences can determine whether Luna is swung understanding or combination, and this burden weighs heavily on him, particularly as he begins to fate that part of his outrage stems from his own undetermined guilt over Luna's history, a guilt that resurfaces with painful clarity as recollections resurface of moments when Luna reached out and was dismissed, minimized, or misknew, making it insolvable for RJ to deny that her exposure wasn't an isolated act of deception but a symptom of a larger pattern of neglect, and this consummation forces him into a quiet but profound tone examination, one that parallels Luna's own reckoning and underscores the script's central assertion that identity is shaped as important by how we're seen as by who we choose to be, and as Luna attempts to navigate this new reality, the durability explores the ruinous irony that now, when she's eventually telling the verity, she's met with dubitation and unbelief, as characters question her motives, her sincerity, and indeed her emotional authenticity. A reversal that reinforces the tragedy of her situation because it glasses the veritably dynamic that drove her to come Dylan in the first place, the sense that Luna's verity was always inconvenient, always misdoubted, always easier to dismiss than to defy, and this cyclical pattern becomes a creepy chorus throughout the durability, suggesting that while individualities can change, the beginning structures that award certain personas over others remain stubbornly complete. And the script deepens this theme by showing how Dylan's competence and authority were readily accepted in spaces where Luna's vulnerability once invited scrutiny, a discrepancy that now forces other characters to defy their own impulses and eyeless spots, whether they're willing to admit them or not, and this tone mindfulness, or warrant thereof, becomes a defining particularity in how characters move forward, because those who are suitable to reflect on their part in Luna's erasure are also the bones most able of extending grace, while those who cleave to rigid moral judgments frequently reveal an reluctance to examine their own conspiracy, and the durability does end wince down from portraying the ugliness of this dynamic, allowing competitions to unfold where Luna is criticized not only for her deception but for the discomfort her verity now creates, as if her survival itself is in vexation, and these moments are among the most emotionally charged in the script, because they force Luna to defy the ruinous possibility that indeed now, authenticity may bring her everything, and yet it's precisely in this gauntlet that the durability begins to gesture toward a fragile form of growth, not through grand gestures or instant remission, but through small, painful acts of tone assertion, moments where Luna refuses to retreat into silence or deviation, choosing rather to claim space as herself. Indeed, when doing so invites hostility, and these moments mark a subtle but significant shift in her bow, suggesting that while Dylan was a guard, Luna may now be learning how to stand without armor, a process that's neither direct nor heroic but achingly mortal, and RJ's presence during this phase becomes decreasingly complex, as he oscillates between wanting to cover Luna from farther detriment and fating that true protection may mean allowing her to face the consequences she has long avoided, a consummation that tests the limits of his empathy and challenges his instinct to control issues. And this pressure culminates in scenes where RJ must decide whether to intermediate on Luna's behalf or step back, understanding that his choices can either support her dependence on others or empower her to define herself on her own terms, and the durability treats these opinions with graveness, framing them as moral crossroads rather than plot conveniences, because each choice carries emotional weight and long-term counter-accusations, and as the story progresses, the ripple goods of the disclosure extend beyond particular connections into institutional and societal realms, as questions arise about legal responsibility, ethical responsibility, and the legality of conduct taken under Dylan's identity, forcing characters to defy uncomfortable Argentine areas where the law